Hey everybody, today is Monday, March 27th. Geez, it has been a while. Monday, March 27th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from John Wick Chapter 4, editor Nathan Orloff.
According to Chad, he interviewed a lot of different editors, and he just went through a lot of people. And I think one of the reasons him and I gelled was that I haven't done a big action movie like this before. And that I wasn't bringing something to the table that, oh, I've done this before, I know how to do this. I had no idea how to do this. And he kind of loved that.
And assistant and additional editor Nicholas Lundgren.
Thanks to Nathan, he's very willing to hear me when I say, we tried this and it's not working, which is a privileged position to be in, that he trusts me to say those sorts of things, because that can be difficult from the assistant.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, let's see if I can remember how to do this. Forgive me if I'm a little rusty. So, what's new with you? Well, that's nice. What have I been up to? Well, let's see. I think I let you know I would be out for a little bit. I didn't expect it to be quite this long, but here we are. I was in LA for the Ace Eddie Awards and also some other Oscar-related activities. The Ace Eddies was a fantastic time. Thank you for asking. The awards part is always great, and I'm very happy for all the nominees and winners. There's nothing better than seeing editors recognized for their hard work and talent and acknowledging the crucial role they play in the storytelling process. So yes, the awards are great, but the part I really love is getting to catch up with a lot of people that I haven't seen in a while. I got to talk to people that I know but have never really talked to in person. And then I got to talk to new people. New to me, that is. I'm sure they've been people for a while. And for all the people I did get to talk to, there were 4 times as many, at least, that I didn't get to talk to and wished I could have. And that's the way these events always go. You just look around and think, oh, there's so-and-so over there. I got to go talk to them. And then you never do because you're busy talking to 20 other people. So if you've never been to the Eddies before, and perhaps you're geographically and financially challenged in going, I understand that. But if you've never been, it is a great time not to just celebrate the accomplishments of editors, but an absolutely amazing time to talk with them and to share ideas and experiences. That kind of thing doesn't happen nearly enough. And put aside the Eddies themselves for a moment. You don't need to go to the Eddies. But wherever you are in the world, start connecting with editors or just people who are interested in editing right where you live. And do it often. Because it always fascinates me, these things that editors learn from one another on the rare occasions they have to stop working and start socializing. And while we are on the subject of stopping working, there was an interesting theme that floated to the surface in some of the discussions I was having at the Eddies. More than once, more than a few times actually, editors mentioned having a hesitancy to slow down and take a break, despite feeling burned out. And I'm talking about Oscar-winning film editors, editors of big hit TV shows. Despite all that they had already accomplished, there was a fear that if they didn't take that next job right away, some of the heat they had would cool. Now, I can't speak with any authority to say that they're wrong, but I have a hard time believing they're right. The work will always be there. If you need a break, you need a break. Better to take one because you're aware of your own needs, mentally and physically, than have one taken for you because you crashed and burned from exhaustion or other problems. Maybe if you're young and starting out, you feel like you have to push yourself. And maybe that's true. But we do all have our limits, and nothing is more important than your health or your personal relationships. Which leads us back to my little sabbatical. Yes, I did take this break because I just had too much going on with my day job to keep up the pace of the podcast. But I admit it also felt good not to be preoccupied with where the next episode of The Rough Cut would be coming from. I need a break too, from time to time. We all do. And now that I've had that break, I'm rested and ready to get back at it. And what a way to get back at it, talking about the new film John Wick Chapter 4. The last time we visited the world of Wick, it was for John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum and editor Evan Schiff. This time, it's with editor Nathan Orloff, who last joined us here on The Rough Cut for Ghostbusters Afterlife. Also with us today is assistant editor turned additional editor Nicholas Lundgren. Nathan and Nicholas have a great story for how they joined this project and how they began working together. They have a lot of great stories, in fact, about their experience on this film. And we will get into all of them in just a few moments. First, I got to try and remember how to do this live ad read thing. Because we need to spread the word and the music about our friends and Rough Cut sponsor Extreme Music. Now, if you have seen John Wick Chapter 4, and I do hope you have, there is a lot of really cool music in it. I ain't gonna lie, I am too old and out of touch to know who the artists are behind it, but that does not matter, because I know Extreme Music, And they know all the best artists out there making great stuff that you can license for your next film or TV show. And it's so easy to find. All you have to do is search their vast catalog of tracks with keywords like tempo, genre, lyrics, stuff like that. You can even give them a track for reference so they can find you more just like it. On top of that, you can get those tracks in different lengths. Maybe you just need 30 seconds, not 2 minutes. And you can also customize the instrumentation because maybe the banjo wouldn't be appropriate in your epic sci-fi fantasy. And then when it's time to take care of the licensing, they make it so simple to do. You can do it right there in their website, or you can get that personal touch from one of their reps. And by personal touch, I just mean they'll talk you through it over the phone. Don't be creepy. So the next time you have a story to tell, whether it's chapter 4, 5, or any other number, tell it with great production audio from Extreme Music. Okay, I am beyond ready for this. I don't know about you. This is a really fun movie to talk about, and these are really fun and talented editors to talk to. From John Wick Chapter 4, here are Nathan Orloff and Nicholas Lundgren.
The higher powers of the production office know what they're doing.
Nathan doesn't seem to have a commentary on that. Sometimes all you can do is believe in the higher-ups in the movie industry. Well, Nathan, last time we spoke, I believe it was for Ghostbusters Afterlife, which you co-edited with Dana Glauberman. I know you've done a feature before, but more of a smaller budget indie kind of thing. So this is your first big feature you're doing as a solo editor. What were the circumstances that led to you getting this gig?
The circumstances are kind of fascinating in terms of that. I mean, I usually find that when productions are gearing up and everything's going a million miles a minute, the editor is, I think, sometimes the last thing, sometimes that they're prioritizing to hire and bring on, just because production design needs so much headroom and the DP needs so much like lead up time and all of that. But Chad, I think, kind of pushed it in terms of, he was looking for a new editor to work with on this movie. Evan Schiff, a mentor of mine and someone I deeply, deeply admire, was unavailable. And according to Chad, he interviewed a lot of different editors. And my name came up on a list. I think my agent submitted it to Lionsgate, and he just went through a lot of people. And I think one of the reasons him and I gelled was that I haven't done a big action movie like this before. And that I wasn't bringing something to the table that, I've done this before, I know how to do this. I had no idea how to do this. And he kind of loved that. He was telling me movies he liked between musicals and old Hong Kong movies and the way those are edited. I don't think he wanted someone that cut modern action movies the way they're currently cut. And him and I really gelled on sort of trying to this as an approach to learn something new and be open to new ideas on how to do them.
You mentioned Evan Schiff, who I was going to bring up anyway. He cut John Wick's 2 and 3. Did you call him and ask for any advice about how to approach this film and certainly about working with Chad?
Oh, absolutely. No, I called him. And like I mentioned in terms of like how late into the process, I think I interviewed with Chad. The first time was, I think, either 4 to 6 weeks before shooting started. And then the second interview, I believe, was about 2.5 weeks, maybe max 3 weeks before production. And then I found out that they wanted to bring me on 2 weeks before production started, which means I had 2 weeks to sort of get visas together and pack and go leave for Europe for 5 months, which was crazy. And in that time, I called Evan and asked for advice and asked for his impressions with Chad. And it really helped me land on the ground, ready to go and ready to have ready with my expectations of what Chad expected during production, in terms of he's not the type of director to come to the edit bay after set. They shoot nights. The whole movie is shot. He loves shooting nights. The locations you get are more unique. Most of the movie is set at night anyway. He has this thing where he just loves shooting nights. And so he's not going to come into the office at 7 a.m. And I didn't need to match nights. So what happened is I came into this rhythm of, and this is something that Evan helped me realize, is I'd come to set at the beginning of their day around 8 p.m. So I'd finish my day, bring an iPad with some edits and I'd come and show him being hey, this is where we are. And he would give me some notes and ideas or this or that, or yes, great, move to the next thing. And so our relationship, Evan helped me sort of establish those expectations of what Chad might want from me during production.
So Evan is somebody you knew from your days at Bad Robot, and the roots of the Bad Robot tree reach far and wide because Nicholas, I believe you assisted another editor from Nathan's, we'll call it Bad Robot class, and that's Matt Evans. I think you did Overlord and Michael Giacchino's short film Monster Challenge, which I love. So where in the timeline did you begin working with Nathan?
So actually, Nathan was my route into Bad Robot, sort of a very non-traditional route. Also, very deep cut on the Michael Giacchino short. Love to bring that up. It's very fun. Totally worth seeking out. So I actually met Nathan through an old high school friend, Morgan Dameron, who was JJ's assistant during the days of Force Awakens. And she was going to, write and direct and produce her debut indie film. And it was shooting in Kansas City, where I was living at the time. And so I donated to the Kickstarter and then immediately reached out and said, "Hey, I see you have this editor, Nathan Orloff. Do you need someone to sync dailies? Because I'll do that." And so that was actually when I met Nathan in summer of 2016. And then we ended up bringing post back. JJ and the team at Bad Robot were super generous and let Morgan and Nathan set up shop there, and then somehow let me put a computer in a hallway and sit there and continue to assist. So that was my way in. And then, sort of from there, Nathan was working on Overlord a bit. So I met Matt Evans through him, and then ended up seeing that through almost to the end before going to another movie with Nathan.
So when you first started talking to Nathan about assisting him, what are the things that you ask the editor in an interview? Like, we always talk about the questions you have to answer as an assistant. What kind of things do you pose to the editor in an interview like that?
I mean, I was so green at the time. I had been working sort of as a producer, editor, one-man team position at a international NGO called water.org. They do great work. Come up. But I was doing that and hadn't actually worked on narrative at all. I'd been doing all documentary. So my questions were, I'm sure, so silly and simple. And also I was just so excited to be a part of it. But now I have a better handle on things. And my questions are manifold. How do they work? How do they like things delivered to them? What are their expectations in terms of turnaround time on things? And then also, are there times and places where you're willing to let your assistant get their hands dirty and do a little bit of cutting? Because it's an amazing role, the assistant position, and you get to touch so many different parts of the process. But at the end of the day, I know I'm not alone in that, my goal is to cut picture. So that's also a key and important thing in addition to making sure our working styles meld.
Well, apparently Nathan's pretty cool with you getting your hands dirty because you scored an additional editor credit on this film, which we'll talk about. But let's circle back a little bit to Chad's whole, I don't want an editor that cuts action to cut my big action movie. To prep for this, other than going back and watching the first 3 movies, did Chad give you any guidance on how he might want this film to shift, if at all, from the first 3? And did he give you any sort of reference films to work with?
Absolutely. And that's something that might be one of the things I was most nervous about and by the way, those conversations about that he didn't want someone that was familiar with an action movie, or he hadn't cut an action movie like this. That's something he told me like a few months ago. That is not something he mentioned during the interview. Yeah. That was something he was holding close to his chest. Is not something he mentioned during the interview. And so something I was very intent on, and so was he, and was what movies you were referencing. And one of the things I admired so much that he said during, I think it was the second conversation I had with him, and that might have been after I read the script, I was like, yeah, this is very different. The movie has kind of these 3, obviously still John's his main character, but these other 2 main characters. And it's, as far as I know, it was hard for me to remember that many scenes in John Wick films. It definitely happened where the scene wasn't around John's point of view, where you cut away to maybe it would do the Winston, maybe it would go to it would go, to change main characters sort of, and not instead of these other protagonists. It was something very new for this franchise. And then talking to him about that, he was like, well, this is very good, bad, and the ugly. We're trying these big sort of, he basically just wanted to do a samurai Western. And those are genres of films that I've admired from afar, but I haven't really, dove deep on. And I admire that a lot because he talked about, he's like, I don't want to just do the same movie over again. It's like, I'd rather, I'd rather swing and a miss and do something that I'm really passionate about than do the same John Wick film over and over again. So the movies that I'd watch were Good, Bad, the Ugly, For a Fistful of Dollars. I guess it's the Man with No Name trilogy in general. And then Seven Samurai, other Kurosawa films. And then my favorite one to bring up is Singing in the Rain. Okay, he's a huge fan of musicals. And he went off on beautiful, wonderful tangent about how musicals used to be cut. Not disparaging modern musicals, because I think that, musicals like Elvis and Moulin Rouge are absolutely incredible and on next level editing. But musicals like back then were sort of like you edited around the dancing. You showed them dancing. They would do a move, finish, cut, start something else. And the way he talked about that really inspired me. So that was another film I watched. I actually watched that on the plane to Berlin. And I'd never seen Singing in the Rain, and I love it. I actually was blown away by it. It's such a great film. And the way they cut around the performers really showed how good these actors are. And I wanted to do that with Keanu. I wanted to do that with Rena. I wanted to do that with our characters and not use the editing to try to punch anything up. I wanted to get out of the way. And there's times in the films where, like, they're not perfect. They slip, or there's something not great about this timing or this or that, but not being so obsessive about perfection makes it just so much more real. When you're not cutting, when you're cutting less, you're able to absorb everything more. And I feel, actually, in a weird way, you get more exhausted for the characters. You feel more empathy for the characters because you feel like you're just there.
You mentioned the other characters, taking away from John's point of view, characters like Kane and Tracker. I think they contribute to some of the up-leveled comedy aspects of this film. They're kind of wise guys. And then again, there's also almost sort of this slapstick kind of comedy in some of the falls that Keanu takes, especially when he gets knocked down this enormous staircase, more than once, in fact. And I just like to talk about how you dial things up and down comedically, because it's still a John Wick movie and it's still got to be this high-intensity action movie. But as you've illustrated in this film, sometimes it's just kind of funny that a guy falls out of a 2-story window, lands on a van, and then lands on a cobblestone street. Probably not to him, but the way it plays is funny. I'd just love to know if either working with Chad or on your own, you sort of discovered ways of changing something back and forth between this is not funny, this is painful, or there's comedy in this. Is it how long you linger on a shot, how quickly you cut away? Is it all in sound? How do you make something funny that might not be funny on the page?
To me, it's all shot size, and I'll get to that. But I forgot to mention the other big influence on him is Buster Keaton. Huge Buster Keaton fan. And so it's other films I watched. And again, these are films that I've admired from afar, and I watched maybe in film school. But to see them now, I really admired in terms of the same thing of, like, there's not that many edits. You're watching Buster Keaton do these crazy things, and you're just going, holy crap. And something I think it also was an influence was, they had these big wide shots. That's just what they did. That's what they had. That's all they could do to capture everything. And I did feel that the key to us making sure that people are okay with the fact that John is not dead after blank, insert anything in the movie here, is to laugh. And just to laugh at the absurdity of it. And again, I think Chad is almost making these live action Looney Tunes for adults, where it's just like, sure, the guns and everything is really fun, but it's just about how impressive this all is. You're just impressed by the feat of Keanu and what he's doing, and these stuntmen, what they're doing, and him with the stairs, or if it's being hit by cars. And if I wanted to make it really serious, it's a close-up. That's scary. If John throws a guy into a car, and it's a big wide shot, and the guy goes boom, and it's like a freaking spring, that's funny. That to me was a huge thing to keep in mind. And for instance, like talking about the window, jumping out the window into the van, we cut to a giant wide that's static. And after a very kinetic scene, tense, dog, guns aimed at each other, all this tension, it's this big release of tension to cut to this big breathy wide and just pause and watch a guy fall from a building. And I loved subverting expectations and not being so serious.
If you look at the stairs, I think there are a couple different interesting things that happen there in that big pratfall that make it funny. And kudos to you, Nathan, like not only living in those wides, but then also the cutting close into the performance of John's exasperation when he lands and slams his hand down. Like, Keanu has this amazing ability, like a Keaton, or, like a chaplain, to sort of hold the audience's emotions in his face. And he does that when he hits there. And then similarly, when we were on the soundstage, our sound team had laid in, I mean, gosh, their work across the picture is just phenomenal. But we were watching the second portion of the stairfall, and Nathan had this brilliant idea to not only use the size of shot to give you that wide perspective, but to also use the perspective of Keanu's efforts as he's going down. So as he's rolling away, it gets quieter and quieter. And then we cut to the reverse and it's quiet. And then it gets louder and louder as it comes to you. And there's just these little rhythms that are so funny in that scene. And it's a meld of all of those different elements.
I went to see the film at a screening with somebody who had never seen a John Wick movie before. And I was wondering, well, how lost are they going to be? And how much effort will the filmmakers put into resetting, getting people caught up? I mean, when you're doing a franchise film, there's that decision you have to make about how much do I labor at the beginning to reset the table, so to speak, no pun intended. And you didn't do that hardly at all. Matter of fact, I would say remove the hardly. You didn't do that at all. I mean, you just jump in, and the mythology of John Wick is kind of complicated. The high table, how markers work, the Bowery, the rules. There was so much world building that went on in the first one. And going into this one, you do nothing. And a testament to how well you pulled it off, nobody cares because it's just such a fun, intense film. So at any point, were there things in the film that sort of helped the audience get caught up to where John Wick Chapter 4 begins?
No, actually. There's nothing really we cut out. It was something I thought about when I read the script and shooting. I wasn't worried, but I had in the back of my head of wondering, it is kind of unforgiving in that regard. But at the same time, it's something I kept thinking about, because I did bring it up to Chad. I was like, look, because of COVID, this movie was delayed. It's been a while since people have seen 3. This is a longer distance between sequels than the other movies. Maybe there's some version of it, but then it's like, well, how much do you recap? And the more I watched the movie, especially when we would go to a preview audience, and it was easier for me to put my mindset in okay, you haven't watched the third one since the theaters. What if you're just watching this now? And the nice thing about the script that was written is that it still does unfold its own plot with its own stakes. You start off with, maybe you don't understand why John kills the elder at the beginning of the film, but if you can figure that out from, even if you only saw the first one, you can sort of put it together. But then between the scene in the marquee and the hotel being blown up, it sort of does unfold like a flower in terms of the stakes and the plot, where it is kind of self-contained in my mind. As long as you can accept that John was out for revenge at the beginning, and now he needs to learn his lessons, that people that he has cared about are reeling from the consequences of his actions. That's all you need to know.
So, Nicholas, when we were talking about the interview you did with Nathan about asking an editor what they're looking for in an assistant, once you guys commit to doing this film, and it sounds like for Nathan pretty late in the process, what is your role as assistant in terms of setting up the cutting room or establishing the preferred workflows for Nathan and yourself?
Sure. And this was such an interesting experience too, because we were both starting a little bit behind the 8 ball, trying to figure out how to get everything going from afar. I was on a family vacation in rural upstate New York, trying to figure out how to get a passport renewal ASAP and how to get these cutting rooms up and running. And so it's a really interesting process. And it's one where, you have to both take charge and also trust people. So, thankfully we had amazing support from our vendors, which on Wick were, when we were abroad, it was Pivotal UK, setting up our rooms at an Avid post facility. So first it's trusting them, but then also verifying all of the things are how we want them. And then also Nathan is never afraid to try something new, whether that's the latest version of Avid or some cockamamie idea about, we're going to set up my desk as a pyramid of monitors, which is how it ended. But we'll always, he'll come to me with some idea and we'll say, okay, well, let's try it, see how it works. For me, at least, I think in our relationship, it's a question of being flexible and willing to try new things to the best of our ability. And also, thanks to Nathan, he's very willing to hear me when I say, we tried this and it's not working, which is a privileged position to be in, that he trusts me to say those sorts of things, because that can be difficult from the assistant. vantage to say no. No can be a very difficult thing to say.
I've heard. Well, Nathan, I can't hear a comment like pyramid of monitors and let that go completely. So why don't you do your best to describe your Avid setup and how you like to work on a film like this?
I don't remember when it occurred to me, but I realized that I didn't love that my default head and neck position staring straight was looking at the border between two monitors, which is to me very typical. So what I ended up doing was having one 4K monitor, and it was as low and a little bit angled to the ground or to my desk as possible. And then above that is my client monitor. And that way I have my timeline right in front of me. And actually, since starting to use the new user interface of Avid, I put the timeline on top of this monitor so that it actually is just my timeline full width. And then above that is my client monitor. Those are the things I look at the most. And then below that is my viewer and whatnot, and some other bins for like shortcuts for audio suite and audio effects and different reels and like that. And then to the right of both of these things is a vertical monitor for scenes and script view, which I love for script view because it's just long. Same for scene bins. Is that the way I asked the assistants and Nicholas to arrange it is to make it the width of that vertical monitor, so that it's just the scene bin is just this long vertical thing. And then below all that, I have my artist mixes, which I love using to just grab a quick audio and change the gain on something as I'm making a scene together. So it's sort of this sort of triangle of editing.
So you say artist mixes? You have more than one?
Yeah. Usually request. This one and I had 3.
Okay.
I don't like banking. I just like grabbing A21, boom, up, down, go. Let's do it.
Well, if you got the room on the desk, why not? You know, the world of John Wick is made up of these exotic, very stylized locations and sets. He's riding through the desert, having a gunfight one minute, then he's, shooting it out in a nightclub the next. And as I'm watching the film, I'm thinking about this recent increase in the use of virtual set technology and things like stagecraft. Did you use any of that here, or did you have a lot of blue screen sets that you had to work with? And also, I know you edited on location because you had to get a visa, but I don't think you edited on set at all. So this is a multi-part question, which means I really didn't deliver it very well. But let's start with virtual set technology and blue screen versus real sets. How did that play out on John Wick?
There was only 2 sets that involved blue screen, and one of them was sort of like a little bit like half the scene or 2/3 of the scene was blue, and the other was practical. Chad wants locations. He wants real locations. He prefers it. And that's, to me, some of the why John Wick has the sort of texture that it does is there is his and Dan, the cinematographer's tenacity for real locations. And we only did blue screen when we had to, absolutely had to. There was no choice. And so it creates this really just beautiful, intense thing that you can't really design in terms of the diversity of the across the picture.
Well, and I remember too, when we were working on the Berlin montage, one of the things that Chad said that stuck out to me, because it's exactly how I felt watching John Wick 2, he was like, I want this to feel like a tourism video brochure for the John Wick world version of Berlin.
Yes.
Like, I want you to think this place is cool and I gotta visit it. And that's how I felt watching 2 when we cut to Rome the first time. I was like, oh, I haven't been to Rome in so long. This is a cool version of Rome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I don't know how much difference there is between the real Berlin and the John Wick Berlin, but I'll take your word for it. If you don't mind, I'd like to spend a little more time on the whole setting things up for Nathan part. For you, Nicholas, what is your process for organizing media, both in terms of tagging it and arranging it? Do you have the world famous 3x5 cards? Do you just do everything digitally? How do you approach managing what is, in one sense, kind of a simple story, but there's just so much going on?
Yeah, I mean, the broad answer is yes, all of the above. Starting from the beginning, my sort of ethos as a first assistant is that, it's my job not only to keep things organized, but to keep things in lockstep from receiving those dailies all the way through to finishing with color. And as part of that, that also means handing things to Nathan in a way that is instantly legible. So over the course of multiple projects, we've sort of come up with our own visual language for a bin layout, and that gets changed and tweaked even during each show. How are we doing this? But it's arranging things in script order versus setup order, sort of putting people's coverage close to itself versus, just jumping around willy-nilly. And that extends to the script as well. The script then, Nathan prefers to have on one side of coverage, and then on the other side, a different side of coverage, so that we can just sort of at a glance tell what's going on in any sort of scene bin or script bin. And then, going forward during the production, we actually, in part because we were on location in Berlin and in Paris and things were starting a little bit behind, we immediately just decided to go all digital, which was huge. My assistants in Berlin were super helpful with that. Christian Reinhardt and our amazing PA, Nicole, sort of kept everything together digitally. And then as we moved forward, we were able to take it to a more physical space once we were in our offices in Manhattan Beach. And we did create hundreds of those glossy 3x5 cards. We had this whole setup with Velcro on these cabinet walls where we could instantly rearrange things and just see what made sense. And it's been that way since the first time I worked with you, Nathan. We even on Different Flowers, on Worm, being able to see things at a glance, I think would probably be your number one desire. And so that's the whole movie at a glance. And then a scene bin that's in your vertical monitor is, this is this scene at a glance. How can you try to digest everything from the macro so that you can make these micro decisions?
Absolutely. That's hugely helpful.
It's kind of a winding answer, but I hope that made sense.
The elements before the dailies, do you get anything like storyboards or animatics or Previz, or is it all stunt viz that you work with? And what is your hand in that, if anything?
I think we got one stunt viz sequence.
One stunt viz and one Previz.
That's it?
There were other things shot, but that is what we received.
Yeah, he does shoot stunt viz where the stunt coordinators shoot and edit their own stuff. But he intentionally kept that away from us so that when we got it, we had fresh eyes.
All right, well, then that begs the question, what kind of direction do you get in cutting action? Because when it just says John works his way through the hotel, gunning down about 1 million people and then nunchucking a few more, what kind of guidance do you get there?
Well, this going back to stunt viz for a sec, I think the main thing that stunt viz is helps Chad is also calculate number of setups. They carve out the stunts being like, this is what we can do in this shot. This is kind of the shot. This is kind of the angle. We're aiming this way. And this is going to be the overall beats. And then we're doing the shot. And this is the little overlap in between this and the next shot. And that's how they sort of map it out. And then definitely there's probably times where they got to set and they did an additional shot, and then they always will have a B cam. And they don't do that for stunt viz. So there's always kind of this other camera that's useful to help edit and link things. But Chad shoots incredibly linearly, these sequences. The best example being the exhibition hall in Osaka with the nunchucks in this 9-minute sequence where he's just going through guys. And they start at the beginning and they kind of figure it out as they go. They create these beautiful sets. They know that they can, in any direction, there's going to be a great angle somewhere. But they have these plans of okay, the guys are going to come in here, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they know they're going to go this way. And they just keep shooting linearly. And the script supervisor is there. Chad has a great instinct for this, of how much overlap are between setups. Sometimes it's not that much. Sometimes it's pretty tight and difficult. And there are times where I'd get footage and I'm like, there's only so many ways to link this action to the next action without a clumsy, and here's the B cam, and now we're back. Like, it also contributed to that style I was talking about earlier of like cutting between breaks. It actually organically helped because instead of trying to edit on a punch, might not match between this take and that take, I'm editing on their rest. I'm editing on when they slide and land, cut, getting up and go. And so it was very much, I didn't get a lot of direction during production of how to put these action sequences together. It sort of was like out of necessity. How do these Lego pieces fit? And it was kind of cool and a little bit validating that when we got back to LA, that most of the stuff we did was just trimming and removing versus reconstruction. because, like I said, there's only so many ways these go together. So they'll shoot until they get the stunt right. And so it's usually the last take or two. You know, it's very different than a dialogue performance where it's like, well, what if I grab take one's line here and take three's line? No, with the stunt, it's like, sorry, take six. That was it. That was the only one we can use.
Did you find that's a pretty trustworthy approach in that in action, the later takes, you could almost start at the last couple of takes and work your way backwards?
Yeah, I usually do. I usually start at the last one or this early, whatever marked select, which is a lot of times typically be the second to last. And then they would do one more as like kind of a safety. And so I'd watch those last two or three first. And if I had a hard time putting those together, then I'd look at the other ones. But I look at by the end of it, I look at everything.
You mentioned that Chad likes to shoot linearly, and that sort of plays into something I did want to ask you about, and you kind of addressed already, is just how tricky is continuity when the action never stops?
The primary thing to me with continuity, is it in focus, and is it the focus of the shot? The continuity to me only matters if it's what Keanu is doing. If it's background or if it's whatnot, like I've failed keeping your attention if you're noticing that. The primary thing is being entertaining. The primary thing is emoting with John and what he's going through. And I think you can get away with a lot just by being captivating. If you spend time looking at all the dead bodies in the background of Exhibition Hall, sure, have fun. Make a YouTube video. Call us out. It's not perfect. I still think it's enjoyable. I mean, the script supervisor did an amazing job, and it was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, kudos to Aria Harrison. She killed it.
Seriously, she totally did. She would name the different bodies so that she could keep track of who was where. And then when I would come to set being like, hey, I think we need to go back to this other beat and shoot this one thing, she'd be like, what do you mean? And so I had to arrange. Because if then doing it non-linearly was like a nightmare, because then you're having to try to match. But continuity is something that I basically ignore until it's bothering me.
And will you check each other? I mean,
yeah.
9-minute sequence. How exhausting that has to be for you as an editor. Like you kind of, I would think, just have to take a break and go, I can't work on this anymore, or I have to look at this with fresh eyes maybe tomorrow, because again, 9 minutes of just nonstop guns and punches and kicks and weapons. And so how do you reset yourself? And also, how do you check one another for things like that? Absolutely.
My biggest reset is music. When assembling, I'll listen to score just in the background and cut basically on mute or very low volume in terms of it depends on, I guess it depends on the scene and the context of how bad, not how bad, but how distracting the production audio is. And then when I get something that I'm like, oh, I think this is working, then I'll throw a temp track in, which sort of throws my entire brain into refresh mode of it feels like a different sequence. And then the main thing I do is show Nicholas. It's a very ADHD thing. I think it's called body doubling. Is when someone else is in the room, it changes and makes your entire perspective and able to focus more. And I love showing Nicholas things. It's one of the reasons that, besides the fact that he's edited scenes in this film and then also worked with Chad on, I can't even tell you how many alternates to see, explore different versions of things. Showing Nicholas is a huge component of my process in terms of being able to get a perspective on. There are times where I'll be like, okay, this is working. Can you come in? And then I play it and I'm like, oh, that didn't work at all, did it? And he's like, well, and I'm like, all right, no, I'll show you 10 minutes. Come back. It's I'm just going and going, but it's really helpful.
So we talked about the importance of continuity in action. The other component of that is geography, the blocking of the scene. There's many scenes in the film that are worthy of discussion, but there's one that takes place around the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, which is absolutely amazing. And if you think about it, so obviously it's a 360 kind of setup because you could be anywhere in that rotary around the arc. And then there are multiple lanes of traffic that they're fighting amongst. So it's your depth, how far away the action is away from the arc. And it's an incredible feat that you pulled off with this scene and keeping the audience related to where the action is, where it should be in this rotary, how far away it should be from the structure. Extremely technical. And I have no specific question other than to say, how did you do it?
The Arc de Triomphe sequence is a sequence that I'm really, really proud of, especially since it was kind of crazy and difficult to put together, because all the hits are real. It was all cars. We didn't shoot at the Arc, but because it's just background replacement, but all the stunts are real. So geography was especially kind of complicated to keep together since it was just a tarmac in Berlin. But unlike the opposite of continuity, geography is something that is, I think, paramount. And the way I look at it is that you should be able to explain every shot to a blind child very quickly. And what I mean by that is that in the simplest fashion of John runs, stops, looks around. That's a story beat. It's 2 seconds long, but it's a story beat, and it's important. Instead of cutting from John running at a screen right, and then all of a sudden you have these cars coming to a stop. Where are we? We don't know. Who's looking there? Nobody. What's going on? John runs out a screen right, cut to a wide shot of John running through traffic, stops, looks around, sees, cut. There's a bunch of cars coming to a stop. Now we have our protagonist and threat. Now I've created a relationship. Now we're telling a story. And if you're cutting too fast, if you're just punching things up for the sake of punching things up, you're confusing the audience. You're disorienting them. Sometimes you want to do, and sometimes we do that intentionally. But to me, those should be incredibly selective when we do that. And this is something from my Bad Robot days and talking with Mary Jo Markey and having cigarettes outside of Bad Robot, was how much she cared and was so being crystal clear in geography and story during an action scene. There's still story happening. That's the thing that I think a lot of people, it's kind of interesting to talk about, is that these are dialogue scenes without dialogue. And especially in terms of these, kung fu or gun fu, I should say, it's a conversation between villains and heroes. And it's just as important as is a dialogue scene in terms of following what's going on.
So in addition to the Arc de Triomphe sequence, there is one other that I have to ask you about, and that's the over-the-top sequence in the apartment building, I believe it is. It's literally an over-the-top shot, bird's eye view, oneer that tracks John through a building as he's shooting it out with the assassins. It's like you rip the roof off of this building and we follow John from room to room with the building rotating at times. You would be completely forgiven if it was just VFX, but I'm going to ask anyway, is that VFX or is that a lot of editorial sleight of hand that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we change, Nicholas, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 2 splices.
Yeah, I think there's wholesale 2 splices where, it was planned on set so that they could, get the best versions of every possible action. And then there are a couple, like you said, interframe things where we're, moving elements around even in editorial and then further in the VFX side. But it's amazing. They did that whole thing to basically like a click track, just like a dance sequence where they kept everyone on beat and did the same actions over and over and over again to this amazing balletic result. It's very cool.
How many takes of that did you have?
I want to say 15 of the main meat of it. Is that right, Nathan?
I think so. I think it was 15 or 17.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I think they did that split was mainly just because of the fire. They wanted to do the kitchen fire. That was the one thing that was sort of like slightly isolated.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is exactly where it is. Spoilers to people who want to find that stuff.
Going back to something else that Chad said in an interview, he was very vocal about the idea of whether or not real guns with blanks should be used on set. He's very much against that. So he uses these electronic guns or plug guns, I guess, that rely on CG to try and sell the authenticity. How does that affect you as editors? Do you have to do more temp VFX or is the effect on set sufficient?
This opens up a whole fun can of worms because we got back and it was something that I think became very clear early on that I needed help on. And it became something that we realized if we left it to, let's say, VFX department, that's a whole chain. And by the time it came back to Chad to make changes, it's too much time had passed. That editorial needed to be the center of all the decisions of when muzzle flashes happened, when impacts happened, what they did. And we basically created it around sound. Ali Andrus basically are second, and yes, queen. She's amazing. We really did call her the muzzle flash queen, because she became the person where she was tracing when people fired. She would put the muzzle flash. 1 frame later, the impact would be over here, and she'd put all the sound effects in to match. And then we would adjust stuff based on that, being like, oh, the rhythm is not quite right. Maybe we need to fake this so that they don't fire there, and we add another one here. So that way we got our sort of sound template of how the scene feels rhythmically with gunfire.
In addition to that, since the whole goal was, this process of, Nathan would cut the scene, then Ali would take a look at those things, then I'd review it, then we would present it to Nathan. Our visual shorthand was a series of subcap dots that we would place around the frame, which, different colors meant different types of impacts, and then muzzle flashes, so that without taking the time of our amazing VFX editors, we could sort of have a visual representation that matched that sound and then say, okay, we have our roadmap, execute across all departments.
One of the things I recall, since we've sort of transitioned into sound, we'll go back to the Bad Robot days again, back around the Star Trek Into Darkness timeframe, how much effort was placed on audio in picture editorial. You were the first ones that I recall doing 5.1 in picture editorial, really exploring the real-time audio suite plugins to sweeten your dialogue and effects tracks. What was it you learned back then, and how might you have modified that practice into what you do today?
Yeah, that was a hugely impactful shaping in terms of my process and how I do things. I discovered so early on that the sound bumps are a huge detraction of cutting a scene, that we spend so much time actually just fixing sound to see if an edit's going to work. It's one of the reasons I basically cut on mute a lot. And so it's incredibly important for me to have scenes sell well, not just saying, you know what, in the temp mix for the preview, we'll fix it. I want the director to hear and see the scene the best it possibly can be, because there can be bumps and issues that the cut might be fine, but the sound is the problem. So on this film, to me, we took it to a whole new level where we had an Avid temp mix in 5.1. And as I mentioned, Ali did sort of bulk of sound editing, and Nicholas did this incredible mix pass in Avid that balanced everything together. We never did a Pro Tools temp mix. We previewed twice with just an Avid mix, and it sounded great. And it even allowed our sound team, when they did come on, to just sort of take it and run with it instead of having to sort of start at square one. They were able to, I think, work on some sort of next level things because we've created this foundation in our temp mix that was incredibly solid and played wonderfully. Like I said, I gave this to them. Like, this was something that Nicholas took complete ownership and did an incredible job on.
Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you, and yeah, it was a huge responsibility, and one that was also made possible, like Nathan said, not just by Ali Andrus, who did do the bulk of the sound editing, and then would pass it to me to mix, but then also, we had our other assistants, MJ and Kenji, who were able to pick up the slack on other pieces while we were doing that, because as you're rushing towards a preview, there's so much that's happening in terms of picture and tweaks here and there that Ali and I would have to keep going back through and cleaning up the mix and cutting in new sounds. And part of that was, Chad wanted to be able to make changes up until basically the DCP deadline, just to get the best version, his ideal version of the picture in front of the preview audiences. And I think that was another reason that we leaned into doing this Avid temp mix so hard, was it allowed Nathan and Chad to really hone the product as we were working towards those previews. It was an amazing experience, and the tools inside Avid are super strong. So it was very cool, and something that I will definitely take forward with me.
Well, on top of that, just the amount of sounds that you're working with, you look at any sort of extended fight sequence, there are so many different weapon sounds, different guns, different sounds in a sword fight. You have these two blades making 50 different sounds depending on how the blades strike each other. How do you manage anything like that in picture editorial?
I mean, I think much like with cutting picture, it's equal parts art and science, where you go through and see, what you have tagged and what other people have labeled things as your starting point. But when you see a sound against a picture, I mean, everyone knows if it's right or not. You feel it in your heart. And sometimes that's even the sound needs to be different than real life, which was a big learning moment for, I think, both Allie and I to be like, oh, okay, sometimes movie sound is a little bizarre. But yeah, I mean, speaking of swords, Allie's masterpiece in the temp mix was the sword fight in the shrine. It's just the work that she did there. And Nathan also, helped lay in some backgrounds. It was this big team effort to make it all this sort of Zen moment. And then, you hear our sound team take it to the next level. It's very, very cool.
And there's things that I do edit, with the edit that are hugely the discovery with sound. In terms of early on, I had this concept that when Kane fought a main character, we got out of music. And so when we have this long exhibition hall sequence where it's music, 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 music. And when Kane shows up, goes out. And I really wanted to convey I want to be able to hear what Kane's hearing. Every footstep of John. That's again, we're going back to this is dialogue without dialogue. This is story. Is what we're hearing. And the same thing in the bamboo sword fight is that once they are facing each other, the music dies down and all you hear are crickets and footsteps. And it creates this tension. And we needed to have great sound there to really sell this moment, so that, no one comes along and is like, well, that sounded really lame. We need to put some music in there. I need a team that can do something that really makes it exceptional so that we don't get those notes.
Where does the music come from? Does Chad give you his playlist, or is it stuff that he lets you two explore and find and drop into the timeline? How does that work?
A little bit of all of the above. Nowhere to Run was a direct homage from The Warriors, so that was in the script. That was from Chad. Later, when we got back to LA, we brought on Jen Malone, incredible music supervisor, absolutely badass, love her to death. And other stuff is just stuff from me and Nicholas. There's some weird French music that we love that is in here. There's some DJs that Nicholas loves that kicks off our club sequence as a quick needle drop and then turns into sort of the thumping cool background. And that was actually an interesting discussion because we wanted something that was cool because I think other films might just settle for a thump track. Literally, they call it just the thump track. We wanted something that sounded amazing to make you really kind of want to go out and see the club. Even though it's background, it's got to sound awesome. So you're like, what's going on over there? And then we finally do it. It feels like a release. And, between us and Jen, Justice came along, Gustaffelstein came along, and it was this really fun exploration of music. It was really cool.
Well, music was such an integral part to, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, Nathan, to figuring out the way that the film worked, not only in the action beats, but then also, the extended Paris sequence with the DJ, trying to figure out what she would be playing. And in the end, I think it's super amazing that we ended up, like you said, with Gustaffelstein and with Justice, using all of these French songs from all different genres that our French DJ plays, along with some score from our composers. It's so fun. I still get such a kick out of how I think well that sequence came together in your hands.
Thanks. And we wanted it to be diverse.
Mm-hmm.
We've teased this a few times in the interview, and that is that Nicholas ultimately ended up getting an additional editing credit on the film. How did that all come to pass? Was that just one of those very organic things where it felt like Nicholas was picking up the work on a few different scenes or working more with Chad than he might normally? Or was it, I'm going to need more help on this, Nicholas, you're now going to be an additional?
To me, it kind of became a plethora of a bunch of different aspects and reasons. During any assembly period, I usually need help putting some scenes together and want an assistant that's cutting some scenes. And I think I accidentally kept giving him some pretty difficult ones on this show. And, obviously everything changes a lot when you get through director's cut and after director's cut, and we trim. But it was essential getting his perspective on those scenes and cuts that have stayed through the movie. But then on top of that, I had a few planned vacations that I booked before I even got the show. So there was times I was gone. And that to me is one of the biggest responsibilities, is sitting in the chair. And Chad's there being like, well, what if we try this? What if we try this? It is something that, Chad developed a trust with Nicholas and Nicholas's taste, and to the point where, it always in versions of the train scene that Nicholas did that explored all these different versions of dialogue. Like, what if we lost this line, move this here? And it was essential in exploring, like, to make sure that we knew we had the best version of the scene in the movie. And then on top of that, between notes from either the studio or ideas from Thunder Road, exploring those. And so that Chad and I could keep working on what we wanted to do. Nicholas was like, well, here's all these other notes that, it kind of like just took so much pressure off of me and allowed me to do a better job at what I needed to do. This is absolutely essential that he was just more than just the first assistant on this film.
Well, thank you. And obviously, from my perspective, which is one of extreme gratitude for both the title and also the opportunity to cut these scenes and try notes and work with Chad. It's definitely something that grew as we went along. I mean, I'm sure you remember, Nathan, how mortified I was to show you my first cut of that first scene. I think it was the Shimazu rooftop scene was the first one that I worked on.
Yeah.
And then going from that to this place where, and it's amazing that Chad felt like he had gained trust through me, but then also that I trusted myself to work with Chad was a huge growth experience, and something I'm excited to take forward with me and hopefully, continue to work with directors and with other editors to show them things. So thank you very much for showing the trust in me. I really appreciate that.
Of course. And that's how I got my break. Was Stefan Grub was so generous in giving me a montage to cut. And not only that, said I should work with Jason. And that's how I started my relationship. So many other editors would sort of be like, thanks for cutting that. I'll present it to him. And they keep this closed relationship with the director. And that's how it's traditionally done. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But that to me is like, that changed my life. That started my relationship with Jason Reitman. It allowed me to get Ghostbusters. It wouldn't be here without that. And it's those little decisions to me that are so imperative that I think, this industry is so difficult. If we're not lifting each other up and supporting each other, what are we doing?
Well, we talked about the Arc de Triomphe sequence. We talked about the over-the-top sequence. We talked about the falling down the stairs. We talked about a bunch of things. Amongst all that stuff, for each of you, what was your favorite scene from the film to work on, whether it was the end result that you got out of it or just the type of editing or the experience you had editing that scene?
You should go first, Nicholas.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That was like...
I would say this is such a cop-out answer, but holistically, working on the entire film, there were so many different experiences that were new to me or a stretch for me or something I'd never seen before that was super exciting. And then in a less cop-out way, and tying back to the prior answer about my credit on this film, I'm super proud of Reel One. Reel One, went through a lot of work with Nathan and Chad, a lot to really get things up and running and, get us to the action as quickly as possible. Because like you said, Matt, it's a longer film, but, they still managed to make it feel fleet, in my opinion. And a lot of that is in Reel One. And I'm super proud that some of my cuts still exist on some of those early scenes in the hotel and on the way to Osaka. So for me, those were the most exciting things. But I mean, my God, like, the ending is so cool and so satisfying in a way that, I think I had the least to do with that scene in a way. So that to me, that big monumental piece is it's still fresh to me. Every time I watch it, it still makes me feel emotions and love John and love the movie.
That's a good answer. It's not a cop-out.
Yeah, I loved the beginning and the end and all of the middle.
Holistic is fine. For you, Nathan, you get no such pass. You got to give me a scene.
I'll give you two. The Arc de Triomphe sequence, to me, was a fascinating one to come together. Like I said, to cut it without a background and geography kind of being confusing. And like I mentioned earlier, we talked about how lots of what we did was lift. There wasn't a ton of reimagining of sequences or massive cheats or, like a handful, very few, less than I'm used to on a film in terms of, it was just more like lifting beats and doing a cross cut to sort of simply get things moving along and just keeping only what was the best stunts and the best performances and whatnot. And the arc was also another one where we had a lot. And there was one point where Chad finally was like, you know what? I'm going to go to the other office. You take the rest of the day. Just make it car hit after car hit after car hit. Because it just was too much. It was just too much. And I was like, okay. And so I did this massive trim pass and was kind of ruthless in removing some stuff and reimagined kind of one car, like lost one car hit and cheated something so that we got to the cool one that we wanted earlier. And that all came together to me really well. And having the Gustaffelstein track there, which was honestly, when I put it in there, I was like, this is never lasting for final. This is too weird. Like, no one's going to go for this. This is too out there. This breathy, thumpy, weird track that Nicholas and I were obsessed with. And yet it just became this cool, tight sequence that I'm so proud of and is so fun. And I think we accomplished it. It's just car hit, car hit, car hit. Like, it's just super fun. And it's not because my cameo is in that scene.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Actually, my favorite thing to cut was Nathan did hand me the shot of him dying. So I had to cut him losing his life, which, you know, was satisfying and sad at the same time.
Wait a minute, Nathan. You're going to have to explain that a little more. So you're in the film?
Yeah, I have two shots in the movie. I'm in the montage when everyone's getting ready during Nowhere to Run. I'm right behind Marco coming down the stairs. And then when John Wick does the 180 and flips around and fires out the front, I get shot like 5 times through the windshield.
Nicholas, are you in the movie at all?
You know, my spirit and heart are in the movie a lot, and my music taste as well, so I will take that. But no images, thankfully.
Well, with any luck, you'll get shot in the next one.
God willing.
That is so cool that Nathan is in the movie, and more than once. I love it when editors are actually in a scene in the movie. But, like Nicholas said, editors pour their heart and soul into every scene of the movie. And our 2 guests today certainly did that with John Wick Chapter 4. Big thanks to Nathan and Nicholas, who are both already off on their next filmmaking adventure together. Hopefully they'll join us again when that one comes out. Now, Nathan and Nicholas mentioned a lot of great things they were able to do with Avid Media Composer. Things with audio, things with interframe editing, with editing in general. Wouldn't you like to do some general editing? Well, then be like Nathan and Nicholas and do it with Avid Media Composer. If it can withstand the non-stop action of a John Wick movie, I bet it'll be rock solid for your next project as well. New features and functionality going into Media Composer all the time. Like what? Well, check out the Media Composer page on avid.com and see for yourself. And if you like what you see, maybe you subscribe to a low-cost monthly or annual subscription. Because I love you, I put a link in the show notes to help with that. And with that, my friends, the Rough Cut is back. And just in time to say goodbye again. For today, thanks to all of you that have taken the time to reach out and share some kind words with me about the podcast. As I always say, that is really what keeps me going on this. And even if you haven't reached out to me, thank you for listening to the show. The editors and other professionals featured on the podcast really are incredibly talented, and I learned something from all of them. I hope you do too. Okay, time to go, but I will see you again. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.